Before this story begins, understand one thing. This is not just another horror tale. What you are about to hear is a story about silence, about a town that learned to survive by looking away, and about something that listens when no one is watching. If you enjoy psychological horror, slow-burning tension, and stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark, then you are in the right place. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay with us until the end. Because once you hear this story, it may already know you're listening. The town of Hollow Creek barely existed on most maps. Tucked deep into the forests of northern Virginia, it was the kind of place people passed through without stopping. One main road, a closed gas station, a diner that shut its doors before sunset, and a bridge everyone avoided after dark. Locals called it Old Rail Bridge. Outsiders didn't call it anything at all because no one talked about it, except on one night every year, October 31st. On that night, Hollow Creek went quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that presses against your ears, heavy and wrong. Dogs refused to bark, insects vanished, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ethan Miller noticed it the first time when he was 16. He had lived in Hollow Creek his entire life, long enough to recognize when something felt off. That Halloween night, he was walking home from his friend Mark's house, hands buried in his jacket pockets, the moonlight barely cutting through the trees. That was when the sounds stopped. No crickets, no leaves rustling, no distant hum of cars, just silence. Ethan slowed his steps. Ahead of him, the road curved toward Old Rail Bridge. A wooden sign stood near the entrance, weathered and cracked. Someone had spray-painted over it in red letters years ago. "Turn back." Ethan swallowed. Everyone in town knew the stories. Parents never explained them clearly, just vague warnings, sharp looks and strict rules. Never go near the bridge at night, never go alone, and if you see something white in the trees, run. Ethan told himself he was being stupid. He was 16, not a child afraid of ghost stories. Still, his pulse quickened as he stepped closer to the bridge. Then he heard it. A soft sound, not footsteps, not breathing. A scraping noise, like metal dragged slowly across concrete. It came from beneath the bridge. Ethan froze. The old bridge rose just high enough to hide the narrow dirt path below it. A place where shadows gathered even during the day. The scraping grew louder, slow, deliberate, unhurried. Then something moved. From the darkness under the bridge, a shape emerged. At first, Ethan thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, or a large dog. Then it stood up. It was tall, too tall. Its body was thin, wrapped in something pale that caught the moonlight. As it stepped forward, Ethan realized what he was seeing. A rabbit costume. Long ears, a rounded head, dark, hollow eye holes. The fabric was filthy, stained with mud and something darker. One ear hung limp, torn at the base. The figure tilted its head slowly, unnaturally, as if studying him. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. In its hand was an axe, not raised, not threatening, just hanging there. The scraping sound stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the figure spoke. Its voice was low, distorted, like it hadn't been used in a long time. "You shouldn't be here." Ethan turned and ran. He didn't look back. He didn't stop until he reached his house, slamming the door shut and locking it behind him. His parents found him shaking on the kitchen floor, unable to speak. That night, another name was added to the list of people who had seen the Bunnyman. And Hollow Creek went silent once again. Ethan didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the rabbit head turning toward him, the empty eye holes like open wounds in the night. He heard the voice again, calm, almost disappointed. "You shouldn't be here." By morning, the silence had lifted. Crickets chirped like nothing had happened, and the town looked normal again. Mailbox flags up, trucks rolling past the diner, smoke curling from chimneys. It made Ethan feel crazier, like the night had been a dream he couldn't prove. But when he walked into school, he knew it hadn't been. Mark was waiting by Ethan's locker, his face pale and tight. "You went near the bridge, didn't you?" Ethan stared. "How did you—" "Because it's November 1st, Mark whispered, like the date itself was an accusation. And you look like someone who heard him talk. Ethan glanced around. The hallway felt too bright, too loud. I saw someone. A costume. Mark's eyes flicked toward the nearest teacher, then back. Not here. They skipped first period and drove to the edge of town, where the forest thickened and cell service died. Mark parked near a locked gate with a faded sign that read, "No trespassing, county property beyond it." The old railway tracks cut into the woods like a scar. Mark shut off the engine. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he opened the glove compartment and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a photocopy of something old and yellowed. He handed it to Ethan. It was a newspaper clipping, the ink faded but readable. "Local boy missing near old rail bridge. October 31st, 1969. Ethan's throat tightened. That's decades ago. "Every few years," Mark said quietly, "someone goes missing. The town calls it accidents. Kids call it a curse. But my dad used to work county records. He says it's not random." Ethan forced himself to read the article. A boy named Calvin Price had vanished after a Halloween party. His friends claimed he'd gone to the bridge on a dare. Search parties found his jacket caught on a nail under the wooden beams. They never found him. Below the article was a blurred photo of the bridge, taken in daylight. It looked ordinary, harmless. That was the worst part. Ethan looked up. "Why would a bridge—" "It's not just the bridge," Mark cut in. "It's what's under it." Mark pointed toward the woods, past the gate. "There's a service path beneath the bridge. It leads to a sealed tunnel." Ethan frowned. "A tunnel?" Mark nodded, eyes unfocused like he was repeating something he'd been told too many times. "Old maintenance tunnel from the railway days. When they shut the line down, they sealed it. But people still hear things down there. Scraping, knocking, sometimes laughing." Ethan's stomach dropped. "That scraping last night, I heard it." Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You're not the first." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small flashlight. Then another paper. Newer. A printed screenshot from an online forum. Urban Explore VA. Thread. Hollow Creek Rail Bridge. Posted 10/28/2014. The post described a group of college students exploring the tunnel. They found the concrete entrance blocked by a metal door, welded shut. But someone had painted a message on it in red. Not a tunnel. A mouth. Ethan stared at the words until they blurred. Mark swallowed. Two of them never came back out. Ethan looked at him sharply. "Is that real?" Mark's lips pressed into a thin line. "The police said they left town. The parents said they were runaways. But—" he hesitated. "My cousin was one of them." A cold wind moved through the trees, bending branches that shouldn't have been moving on a calm day. Ethan felt the hair on his arms lift. He remembered the rabbit costume, stained and torn, like it had been worn underground for years. Ethan's voice came out smaller than he wanted. "So what is it?" Mark stared straight ahead at the dark wall of forest. "Some say he was an escaped patient from the old asylum. Some say he was a railway worker who died in the tunnel. Some say it's just a man in a mask." Mark finally looked at Ethan, and there was something in his eyes that made Ethan's blood run cold. "But whatever it is," Mark said, "it doesn't leave the bridge. Not usually." Ethan swallowed hard. "Not usually?" Mark nodded once, slow. "Last night," he said. "The town's siren went off at midnight." Ethan blinked. "I didn't hear any siren." Mark's expression tightened. "Exactly." Ethan felt the floor of reality shift under him, just slightly, like the moment before you realize you've been walking on thin ice. Mark unfolded the newspaper clipping again and tapped a single sentence near the bottom. Witnesses reported an unusual silence across town shortly before the boy vanished. Ethan's mouth went dry. "So," Mark said, "tell me exactly what you saw, every detail." And for the first time, Ethan realized the worst part wasn't that the Bunnyman existed. It was that the town had been preparing for him. The room behind the diner wasn't supposed to exist. Ethan had eaten at Rosie's diner his entire life, always sitting in the same cracked vinyl booths, always watching the same dusty ceiling fans spin overhead. But that afternoon, Mark led him past the kitchen, through a narrow door usually blocked by stacked soda crates, and into a space Ethan had never seen before. The air inside was colder. The walls were bare concrete, stained with age and something darker. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead, humming softly. The room smelled like old paper, coffee and metal, and the wall at the far end was covered. Names, hundreds of them, written in different handwriting, different inks, different sizes. Some were neatly printed, others were scratched deep into the concrete, as if whoever wrote them hadn't trusted pen or marker to last. Dates followed each name. Ethan stepped closer, his chest tightening. "Jeez," he whispered. Mark shut the door behind them. The sound echoed too loudly. "This is why Rosie closes early on Halloween." Ethan turned. "You know about this?" Mark nodded. "Everyone who's lived here long enough does. They just pretend they don't." Ethan's eyes scanned the wall again. Most of the dates fell into a pattern. October 31st, November 1st, years apart. Sometimes 2 years, sometimes 5, sometimes 10, but always the same nights. Ethan pointed to a name near the middle. "That one. Calvin Price. That's the boy from the article." Mark followed his finger. "First confirmed disappearance. That's when they started writing them down." "Who's they?" Mark hesitated, then gestured around the room. "The people who stayed." Ethan swallowed. "And the others? They leave Hollow Creek, or they die here." Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. Why write the names? Mark walked to a small folding table beneath the wall. On it sat a thick binder, its cover cracked and peeling. He opened it. Inside were photocopies of police reports, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, maps of the forest, photographs of the bridge from different decades. Some pages were water-damaged, others were burned around the edges. "This is a record," Mark said. "Not a warning, not a memorial, a record." Ethan frowned. "A record of what?" Mark flipped to the last page. At the bottom, in fresh black ink, was a single name. Ethan Miller. No date. Ethan's vision narrowed. "That's not funny." Mark didn't smile. "I didn't write it," he said. "Rosie did." Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. "Why?" Mark closed the binder slowly. "Because you saw him, and because the silence happened." Ethan's voice shook. "People see things all the time." Mark shook his head. "Not him. Not clearly. Not and live their lives like before." Ethan backed away from the wall. The names felt closer now, pressing in. "So what? This thing just picks people." "No," Mark said. "The town does." Ethan stared. "What?" Mark leaned against the table, suddenly looking older than 17. "Hollow Creek exists because of the bridge. Rail workers, maintenance crews, shipments. This place lived off it. When the line shut down, the town should have died. But it didn't," Ethan said slowly. Mark nodded. "Because something stayed." Ethan remembered the tunnel. Not a tunnel, a mouth. "The first disappearances," Mark continued, "happened when people started sneaking around the bridge, exploring, drinking, daring each other. After Calvin Price, the town panicked. Police came, reporters came, and then nothing." "What do you mean?" "I mean the disappearances stopped. For a while." Ethan's chest tightened. "Because people avoided the bridge." Mark gave a bitter laugh. "No, because the town made a deal." The fluorescent light flickered hard, plunging the room into shadow for a split second. Ethan's heart jumped. "A deal with what?" he asked. Mark didn't answer right away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished object. A key. Old, heavy, rusted. "This opens the service gate beneath the bridge," Mark said. "The sealed tunnel door has another lock behind the wells. Only one family holds the key each generation." Ethan stared at it. "Why?" "Because once every few years," Mark said quietly, "someone has to go down there." Ethan shook his head. "No, that's insane." Mark's eyes met his. "What's insane is thinking you can starve something that lives in the dark and listens for footsteps." Ethan felt sick. "So the list is who the town has offered," Mark said, "or who offered themselves." Ethan's breath came shallow. "And me?" Mark looked away. "Your name wasn't on the wall yesterday," he said. "Rosie added it this morning, right after the siren failed." Ethan's stomach dropped. Failed? Mark nodded slowly. It didn't fail, he said. It went silent. The room seemed to tilt. Ethan remembered the scraping sound, the calm voice. You shouldn't be here. Outside, somewhere in town, a dog began to howl, and then abruptly stopped. Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked it, and his face drained of color. "What?" Ethan demanded. Mark held up the screen. "Unknown number. It knows your name now." The fluorescent light went out completely, and in the darkness, something beneath Hollow Creek scraped against metal, slowly, patiently, as if counting down. The power came back 10 seconds later, just long enough for the scraping to stop. Ethan stood frozen in the diner's back room, heart hammering, convinced that if he moved, even breathed too loudly, something beneath the bridge would hear him. When the fluorescent light flickered back on, the wall of names looked different, not changed, closer, as if the room itself had leaned in. Mark didn't say a word. He simply grabbed the binder, shoved it into his backpack, and unlocked the door. "Come on," he said, "before Rosie comes back." They didn't speak until they were back in the car. Even then, Mark waited until the engine was running and the diner was shrinking in the rearview mirror. "You said something about an asylum," Ethan finally said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, like it didn't fully belong to him anymore. Mark nodded. "Yeah, but if you try to look it up, you won't find it." "That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense," Mark replied. "If you're trying to erase something." They drove past the edge of town, past the last streetlight, onto a narrow road swallowed by trees. The forest closed in on both sides, branches clawing at the sky. After a few miles, Mark slowed and turned onto what looked like a deer trail. He parked near a clearing where the trees bent unnaturally outward, as if something large had once stood there and been torn away. "This was it," Mark said quietly. "Hollow Creek State Psychiatric Facility." Ethan stared at the empty space. "There's nothing here." Mark stepped out of the car. Ethan followed, the air colder here, heavier. "That's the point," Mark said. "It burned down in 1958. Officially, it never reopened. Officially, all patients were transferred. Unofficially." Mark pulled a folded map from his backpack, hand-drawn, yellowed. He pointed to a spot just beyond the clearing. Unofficially, they sealed the underground wing. Ethan's skin prickled. "Why would a hospital have underground wards?" "Isolation," Mark said. "Extreme cases, patients who scared the staff, patients who didn't respond to treatment." Ethan thought of the tunnel. Not a tunnel, a mouth. "They called it Ward C," Mark continued. "No windows, no records that survived, and one patient who never had a real name." Ethan's throat tightened. "The Bunnyman," Mark shook his head. "Not at first." According to the fragments Mark had pieced together, old letters, whispered stories, things overheard by children who weren't supposed to be listening, there had been a man brought into the asylum after attacking several people near the rail line. He wore a blood-stained rabbit costume when they found him, not because he thought he was a rabbit, but because he believed it made him invisible. "He said the mask kept him from being seen," Mark said, "that it confused whatever was watching him from underground." Ethan felt a chill run through him. "Watching him from where?" Mark tapped the map again. "From below. The asylum was built on unstable ground. Old service tunnels, natural caverns, places the railway later cut through." Ethan's mind raced. "So the tunnel under the bridge connects," Mark finished, "or used to." The man in the rabbit costume had been locked in Ward C. Over time, the staff noticed something disturbing. The patients near him stopped screaming, then they stopped talking, then they stopped moving. "They weren't dead," Mark said, "just empty." Ethan whispered, "What happened to the man?" Mark's jaw tightened. "The fire happened. Records say it started in Ward C. Survivors claimed they heard knocking from underground for days after. When rescue crews finally broke through, they found the ward sealed from the inside." Ethan's stomach turned. "And the patient? Gone." Ethan remembered the Bunnyman's voice, steady, controlled. "You shouldn't be here. They say," Mark continued, "that whatever was under the asylum didn't want the man anymore. It learned something from him." Ethan looked back toward the road, suddenly desperate to leave. Learned what? Mark met his eyes. How to wear a shape. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, and for just a second, Ethan thought he saw movement between the trees, something pale slipping behind a trunk. Mark backed toward the car. "There's one more thing," he said. "After the fire, the sightings changed." Ethan's pulse thudded. "Changed how?" Mark opened the driver's door. "That's when people stopped seeing a mask." Ethan's breath caught, and started seeing a face. From deep in the forest, something scraped against stone. Once, then twice. Mark slammed the door. "Get in, now!" The disappearance happened 3 nights later. Not on Halloween, not on November 1st. That alone was enough to make the town uneasy. Ethan found out the next morning, when the school hallway buzzed with a low, nervous energy that teachers pretended not to notice. Lockers slammed harder than usual. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when an adult walked by. By lunchtime, the name was everywhere. Lily Harper. She was 12 years old, lived 3 streets from Ethan, rode her bike past Rosie's diner every afternoon, the kind of kid people remembered smiling. She didn't come home Tuesday night. The official story was simple. She'd gone out to walk her dog near dusk and never returned. Search teams were formed, flyers printed, police cars lined the roads leading out of town, but no one searched near the bridge. Ethan noticed that first. "They're avoiding it," he said to Mark, standing near the school's front steps as parents arrived early to pick up their kids. Mark's face was tight. "They always do." "But Lily wasn't on the list," Ethan said. His voice dropped. "Was she?" Mark shook his head slowly. "No." Ethan's chest tightened. "Then why her?" Mark didn't answer right away. His eyes tracked a black SUV as it rolled past the school, windows tinted, plates from out of county. "They chose wrong," he said finally. That night the silence returned. Ethan felt it before midnight, lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His phone read 11:47 p.m. when the sounds faded. No wind, no insects, no distant engines. He sat up. From somewhere far off, a single sound carried through the stillness. A dog whining, then nothing. Ethan grabbed his jacket and slipped out the back door before his parents could hear. The streetlights flickered as he moved through the neighborhood, shadows stretching too long across the pavement. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he wasn't supposed to stay home. The closer he got to the edge of town, the stronger the feeling became, like pressure building behind his eyes. A pull. When he reached the tree line near the bridge, he stopped short. Someone was already there. A small bike lay on its side near the dirt path, its front wheels still slowly spinning. A leash trailed across the ground, snapped clean in 2. "Lily?" Ethan whispered. The forest didn't answer. Then he heard it. Footsteps, slow, measured, unhurried. They came from beneath the bridge. Ethan's heart pounded as a shape emerged from the shadows. Pale fabric first. Long ears dragging against the wooden beams, the rabbit suit, but it looked different now, cleaner, as if something had cared for it. The figure stepped fully into the moonlight. The axe hung loosely at its side, blade dark and dull. The head tilted just like before, but this time the mouth moved differently. The fabric around it stretched, and beneath the mask something pressed outward, something that didn't fit. "You weren't called yet," the Bunnyman said. Ethan froze. Its voice was clearer now, closer, almost curious. Ethan forced the words out. "You took Lily." The head tilted further, an angle no human neck should manage. "I took what was offered," it said. Ethan's hands shook. "She wasn't on the list." The Bunnyman was quiet for a long moment. Then it laughed softly, a sound like breath dragged across dry leaves. "The list is a promise," it said, "not a rule." It took a step closer. "I was hungry." Ethan backed away, his heel catching on a root. "She's a kid." The figure paused. "So were the others," it said calmly. Ethan's stomach turned. "Where is she?" The Bunnyman looked past him, toward the town, its dim lights barely visible through the trees. "She screamed," it said, almost thoughtfully. At first, Ethan felt bile rise in his throat. Then the figure leaned in, close enough that Ethan could smell damp earth and rust. She didn't belong to the bridge, it continued. But you do. Ethan's blood ran cold. I didn't agree to anything. The Bunnyman straightened. No, it said, but they did. A sound echoed from behind Ethan, metal creaking, the service gate unlocking itself. Ethan turned just long enough to see the path beneath the bridge opening wide, darkness yawning like a waiting mouth. When he looked back, the Bunnyman was already moving, slowly retreating toward the tunnel, axe scraping lightly against the ground. "Midnight tomorrow," it said without turning around. "Bring the key." Then it vanished into the dark. The silence shattered all at once, crickets screaming back to life, wind tearing through the trees, distant sirens finally howling far too late. Ethan collapsed to his knees. Behind him, carved deep into the wooden support of the bridge, fresh and unmistakable, were 4 words. "You owe me one." Ethan didn't go home. He sat beneath the bridge until dawn, knees pulled to his chest, watching the tunnel entrance like it might breathe. The words carved into the beam, "You owe me one," seemed to deepen every time he blinked, as if the wood were slowly swallowing the letters. When the sun finally crept through the trees, the path looked harmless again. Just dirt, just concrete, just an old service gate that shouldn't have been unlocked. But it was. At 7 a.m., Mark found him there. "Jesus," Mark whispered, stepping carefully, like loud footsteps might wake something. "You're alive." Ethan didn't answer. He handed Mark the key. Mark stared at it. "You brought it?" "He told me to," Ethan said. His voice felt thin, worn down. "Midnight tonight." Mark's jaw clenched. "Then we're not doing it." Ethan looked up. "What?" Mark pocketed the key. "This ends. No more lists, no more trades." Ethan let out a hollow laugh. "You think it lets things end?" Mark's eyes flicked toward the tunnel, then back. "I think it learned to bargain. And bargaining means it can lose." They spent the day trying to run, not dramatically, not screaming through the woods, just leaving, packing bags, making excuses, calling relatives in other states. No one answered. Phones rang without sound, messages sent but never delivered. Cars stalled halfway down the road, engines choking like they'd swallowed dirt. The GPS spun uselessly, insisting Hollow Creek didn't exist. By sunset, the town was sealed. That was when the siren went off. Not the warning siren, the old one. The one that hadn't worked in years. It wailed once, then twice. And then it stopped. At 11:58 p.m., the silence dropped like a curtain. Mark stood with Ethan at the edge of the bridge, key clenched in his fist. The air was thick, pressing in on them. Ethan felt the pull again, that invisible pressure behind his eyes guiding him forward. "We don't go down," Mark whispered. "We don't unlock anything." Ethan nodded, though his body leaned toward the gate on its own. Midnight struck. The service gate creaked open, not violently, not angrily, politely. From the tunnel, footsteps echoed upward, slow, deliberate, patient. The Bunnyman emerged without the mask. Ethan gagged. The face beneath was wrong, not monstrous, not deformed, just incomplete. Skin stretched too tight in some places, sagging in others like it had been rearranged. Eyes that reflected the moonlight, but didn't blink. "You're late," it said. Mark stepped forward. "We're done." The Bunnyman looked at him with mild interest. "No," it replied. "You're tired." Mark raised the key. "There's no deal." The Bunnyman smiled, and something beneath the skin shifted, as if the face were only one layer of many. "There is always a deal," it said. "You brought the key." Mark hurled it into the trees. The sound of metal hitting dirt echoed sharply. For the first time, the Bunnyman's expression changed. Not anger, surprise. The silence deepened, pressing harder. The ground beneath the bridge shuddered, just slightly, like something turning over in its sleep. "You misunderstand," the Bunnyman said slowly. "The key doesn't open the door." The service gate slammed shut on its own. Behind them, the forest rustled, not with wind, but with movement. Shapes emerged between the trees, pale, familiar, people. Ethan recognized some of the names from the wall, older faces, younger ones, all standing still, eyes unfocused, bodies wrong in subtle ways. "They open it," the Bunnyman continued. From the inside. Mark backed away. You said one. The Bunnyman tilted its head. I said one at midnight. Something grabbed Ethan's ankle. He screamed, stumbling forward as cold hands tightened, pulling him toward the gate. Mark lunged, gripping Ethan's arm with both hands. Run! Mark shouted. Ethan didn't want to let go. The Bunnyman watched calmly as the struggle played out, like a teacher observing a lesson. Then the ground beneath Mark's feet gave way. He fell backward into the darkness, his scream cut short as the gate burst open. The tunnel swallowed him. The gate slammed shut again. Silence shattered. Wind rushed back. Insects screamed into existence. Somewhere far away, a car engine started. Ethan collapsed, sobbing. From beneath the bridge, a final sound echoed upward, metal scraping concrete, slow and satisfied, and then a voice, no longer close. Tomorrow, it said, we add a name. They found Mark's car the next morning, parked neatly outside Rosie's diner. The doors were unlocked. The keys lay on the dashboard. The radio played softly, stuck between stations. Mark himself was nowhere. By noon, the town had already decided how to talk about it. He ran. Kids do that. Trouble at home. Always knew something was off about him. Ethan listened from the edge of the crowd, feeling like he was standing behind glass. Every lie slid into place too smoothly, practiced and ready, like the town had been rehearsing this moment for years. Rosie didn't open the diner. Instead, she unlocked the back room. Ethan knew what waited inside before he even stepped through the door. The air was colder than the rest of the building, sharp with the smell of concrete and old ink. The wall had changed. Mark's name was there now, not written, carved, deep and violent. The letters uneven, as if whoever had done it hadn't cared about neatness. Only permanence. Mark Turner, 1104. Ethan's stomach twisted. You said the list was a record, he whispered. Not a choice. Rosie stood beside him, her face grey, eyes sunken. She looked smaller than Ethan remembered, like the weight of the wall had been pressing down on her for decades. It's both, she said quietly. Ethan turned on her. You let him die. Rosie didn't flinch. I let the town survive. She crossed the room and opened the binder, flipping past pages Ethan had already seen. She stopped at one he hadn't. A page with names crossed out, some with dates added later. Some erased so hard the paper had torn. When someone refuses, Rosie said, the list moves. Ethan stared at the crossed-out names. Moves to who? Rosie met his eyes. Whoever is closest. The room felt suddenly smaller. Closest to what? Rosie hesitated. Then she said it. To the mouth. Ethan felt the truth settle into him like a weight. The bridge doesn't just take, he said slowly. It pulls. Rosie nodded. And once it learns your shape, it doesn't forget. Ethan backed away from the wall. So Mark was a replacement. Yes. And Lily, Rosie closed the binder. A reminder. Ethan's chest burned. You call that survival? Rosie's voice cracked. I call it math. That night, the town gathered. Not at the bridge, not at the diner, at the old school gym. Parents sat with children pulled close. Elders stood near the walls. No one cried. No one shouted. It felt less like a meeting and more like a verdict. The mayor spoke first, then the sheriff. Then people Ethan had known his entire life. Neighbors, teachers, friends' parents. They spoke in careful, empty language. Balance. Tradition. Necessary. Finally, Rosie turned to Ethan. The list moved, she said gently. It has to settle. Ethan already knew what was coming. He felt it in the way the room avoided his eyes. Rosie took a marker from the table. Your name was first, she said. It still can be. Ethan laughed. A sharp, broken sound. You want me to take his place? We want the town to keep breathing, Rosie replied. Ethan shook his head. You think it stops if you feed it? Rosie's eyes flicked toward the windows, toward the dark forest beyond. It always has. Ethan thought of Mark's scream being cut short, thought of Lily's bike lying in the dirt, thought of the thing beneath the bridge learning how to speak, how to bargain, how to wait. He realized something then, something the town didn't want to understand. It's not hungry anymore, Ethan said. The room stilled. Rosie frowned. What? Ethan looked at them all. It's curious. The lights flickered. From somewhere far away, metal scraped stone. Once, twice. A sound not of impatience but anticipation. Ethan stepped back from the table. You can erase my name, he said. You can carve it deeper, but it won't end. Rosie's voice trembled. Then what do we do? Ethan swallowed. We stop offering, he said, and we start closing the mouth. The scraping sound echoed again, closer this time. And in the back of the gym, unseen by most, a single word appeared slowly on the fogged glass of the exit door, traced from the outside. Choose. They didn't try to stop Ethan. That was the worst part. When he left the gym, pushing through the exit door where the word choose had vanished, no one followed. No one shouted. No one grabbed his arm. The town watched him go the way a body watches blood drain from a wound, quietly, with relief and fear tangled together. Ethan took the key Rosie handed him without a word. Not the old one, a different one. He felt it immediately, heavier than it should have been, warm despite the cold air, vibrating faintly in his palm like something alive. Rosie's fingers trembled as she let go. It won't protect you, she said. I know, Ethan replied. The walk to the bridge felt longer than ever before. The forest leaned inward, branches creaking as if shifting position to get a better view. The silence came early this time, rolling in before midnight, thick and suffocating. When Ethan reached the service gate, it was already open, waiting. The tunnel beyond yawned wide, concrete walls slick with moisture, darkness layered so deep it seemed solid. The smell hit him first, earth, rust, old water, and something else beneath it all, something stale, forgotten. Ethan stepped inside. The gate closed behind him with a soft, final click. The tunnel sloped downward, curving gently, far longer than it should have been. His flashlight beam barely cut through the dark, revealing walls carved with marks, scratches, handprints, words etched deep enough to bleed stone. Names, not all of them from the wall. Some were older, some were wrong, letters twisted, overlapping, as if written by hands that didn't quite remember how fingers worked. Ethan moved forward. The deeper he went, the stronger the pull became, not dragging him, not forcing him, just inviting, like gravity had learned patience. You came without being called. The Bunnyman's voice echoed, no longer ahead or behind, everywhere at once. Ethan stopped. You wanted curiosity, he said. Here it is. A shape unfolded from the darkness, not stepped, not walked, unfolded. The Bunnyman emerged without the costume, without the face it had worn before. What stood before Ethan was tall and unfinished, layers of shapes pressed together like masks, stacked too tightly, human outlines, half-learned, features borrowed and abandoned. I wanted balance, it said. Ethan swallowed his fear and stepped closer. No, you wanted practice. The thing tilted its head. I wanted to understand. You learned how to speak, Ethan continued, how to wait, how to trade. You learned from us. A pause. Yes, it admitted. Ethan raised the key. The tunnel shuddered, dust falling from the ceiling. The thing's attention locked onto it instantly. That doesn't open anything, it said, not calmly this time. No, Ethan said. It closes. He slammed the key into the lock embedded in the tunnel wall. One he hadn't seen until the moment his hand moved, as if the tunnel itself had revealed it only when it was ready. The ground roared. The tunnel walls rippled like flesh tightening. The thing screamed, not in pain, but in confusion, a sound too layered to be one voice. You don't get to choose anymore, Ethan shouted over the noise. No lists, no trades. The thing surged forward, shapes peeling away from it, reaching. The tunnel constricted, not collapsing, closing like a jaw. Ethan ran. The air thickened, resisting him, but he pushed through, lungs burning, heart hammering. Behind him, the thing thrashed, its voice breaking apart into fragments of others. Mark's scream, Lily's sob, dozens more layered together. The gate appeared ahead, light, Ethan dove through as the tunnel snapped shut behind him with a sound like teeth slamming together. Silence exploded into noise. Wind, crickets, a distant car horn. The forest exhaled. Ethan lay on the ground gasping, staring up at the stars. The bridge stood above him, still and ordinary, as if it had never been anything else. Behind him, carved deep into the sealed concrete where the tunnel entrance had been, a final message remained. Fresh, raw, unmistakable. I remember you. Ethan closed his eyes. For the first time, Hollow Creek didn't feel like it was holding its breath. Hollow Creek woke up believing it was over. The morning after Ethan sealed the tunnel, the town breathed differently. People opened their curtains. Cars started without coughing. Phones rang and were answered. Someone laughed in the street, startled by the sound of it, like they'd forgotten how. By noon, the mayor stood on the courthouse steps and called it a miracle. A gas line issue, he said, voice steady, practiced. Structural instability under the bridge. It's been resolved. The bridge was boarded up by sunset. Concrete trucks arrived and left without explanation. Fresh barriers went up. Signs appeared overnight. Unsafe, do not enter. Rosie reopened the diner. The back room stayed locked. Ethan watched it all from a distance, sitting on his porch, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold hours ago. People nodded at him now, smiled, thanked him without words. No one asked what he'd seen, no one asked what he'd heard. That was the first sign something was wrong. The second came 3 days later, when the animals started acting strange. Birds avoided the trees near the bridge, wheeling away at the last second, like they'd hit an invisible wall. Dogs whined at corners of rooms, noses pressed to nothing. Livestock refused to drink from certain troughs, even when thirsty enough to shake. On the fourth night, a man named Howard Ellis called the police. He lived nowhere near the bridge. That's what made it matter. Howard reported scratching sounds inside his walls, slow, careful movements that followed him from room to room. When officers arrived, they found nothing. No pests, no structural damage, just a message carved shallow into the drywall behind his bed. Learning, they painted over it. On the sixth night, a teenager swore she heard her dead brother calling her name from the drainage ditch behind her house. On the seventh, a woman woke up screaming because someone had been standing at the foot of her bed, breathing softly, wearing her husband's face slightly wrong. The town called it stress, grief, adjustment. Ethan called it exactly what it was, practice. He returned to the bridge alone at dusk, slipping past the barriers while the sun bled out behind the trees. The concrete sealing the tunnel entrance was intact, solid, final, and yet the ground felt warmer there. He knelt, pressing his palm to the earth. For just a second he felt it, a faint vibration, not movement but intention, like a thought passing through stone. You didn't die, he whispered. The forest answered with silence. That night, Ethan dreamed of doors. Not the tunnel, not the gate, smaller ones, cracks in foundations, storm drains, basements, crawl spaces, places people didn't think about because they'd always been there. In the dream, something pressed itself flat, thinning, learning how to fit. Ethan woke up screaming. The list appeared again on the 8th day, not in the diner, on the town's message board. Names written in chalk, no dates, no order, just names. Some were crossed out, some were circled. Some had question marks beside them. The sheriff scrubbed it clean before noon, but people had already taken photos, shared them, whispered. That afternoon, Rosie finally unlocked the back room. The wall was empty. Every name gone, not erased, taken. Rosie sank to her knees, fingers tracing the bare concrete. It moved, she whispered. Ethan stood in the doorway, cold settling deep in his bones. No, he said. It spread. As if summoned by the word, a sound rolled through town, not loud, not sharp, a low hum, barely audible, like the echo of a distant engine heard through the ground. People stopped walking, stopped talking, felt it without understanding. Ethan looked toward the bridge, then away from it, toward the houses, the streets, the places that had never been part of the deal. For the first time, he understood the mistake he'd made. He hadn't closed the mouth. He'd taught it how to chew. That night, Hollow Creek didn't go silent. It whispered. And in dozens of homes, in dozens of places no one thought to lock, something pressed close to the other side, patient, curious, wearing memories like borrowed skin, waiting to be invited. Ethan realized the truth too late to stop it. Hollow Creek didn't need the bridge anymore. The deal had never been about a place. It had been about permission. The tunnel, the gate, the key, those were training wheels. Structures to teach the town how to explain what it was doing to itself. Now the thing understood. It didn't knock anymore. It didn't scrape. It didn't wait for midnight. It listened. Ethan spent days walking the town, watching people interact with spaces they trusted. Front doors, bedrooms, basements, the small, dark gaps beneath staircases. He saw how often they spoke names aloud, how often they remembered the dead, how often grief cracked them open just enough. That was all it needed. The first confirmed death after the sealing wasn't dramatic. A man fell down his basement stairs. The autopsy showed nothing unusual except fingerprints on his throat that matched no one in town. The second was quieter. A woman stopped responding to calls. When her sister checked on her, she was sitting at the kitchen table, eyes open, smiling gently at nothing. No signs of struggle, no fear, just absence. Ethan returned to Rosie's diner one last time. The backroom door stood open. On the bare concrete wall, something new had appeared. Not names, not dates. Outlines, hundreds of them. Human-shaped impressions pressed into the surface, shallow and overlapping, like bodies remembered by stone. Some were taller, some smaller, some unfinished. Rosie stood among them, hollow-eyed. "It doesn't need us anymore," she said. Ethan nodded. It never did. The thing had learned the most important lesson from Hollow Creek. Not how to kill, not how to trade, but how humans explain horror until it sounds reasonable. Accident, stress, mental break, natural causes, excuses were doors. That night, Ethan stood in his childhood bedroom, staring at the dark space beneath his bed. He felt it there, not inside the space, but aware of it, curious, patient. "You won't take me," he said aloud. The air thickened. A voice answered, not from one place, but many, layered together. "You already gave me a shape." Ethan understood then what his real role had been. He hadn't been an offering. He'd been a teacher. By confronting it, naming it, defining it, he had helped it refine itself, given it language, given it intention, given it memory. Ethan sat on the bed and made his final choice. He spoke every name he could remember. Calvin, Lily, Mark, the others. He didn't whisper. He didn't beg. He remembered them fully. Faces, voices, imperfections, love. The thing recoiled, not in pain but confusion. The shapes it wore began to blur, edges softening, borrowed features losing cohesion. "Stop," it said, not angrily, but uncertain. Ethan continued. Memory, he realized, was the one thing it couldn't digest without changing. Every name pulled it apart, forced it to carry weight instead of hunger. Outside, across Hollow Creek, others began to remember too. Not rituals, not bargains, stories. The town spoke the dead aloud, not as currency but as truth, and slowly the whispers faded. The thing didn't vanish. It never would. But it thinned, spread too wide, too full. Weeks later, people began leaving Hollow Creek, for real this time. Roads worked, maps updated. The town loosened its grip. Ethan stayed long enough to watch the bridge rot in peace. On his final night, as he packed his car, he felt it watching. Not close, not hungry, just aware. "What are you now?" he asked the dark. The answer came softly, without voice. "I am what you leave behind when you stop feeding fear and start carrying it." Ethan drove away at dawn. Hollow Creek didn't disappear. It just became quiet in the way ordinary places are. And somewhere, not beneath a bridge, not in a tunnel, but in the thin spaces between memory and forgetting, something waited. Not to be fed, but to be remembered, because that is the only shape it can never escape. If this story unsettled you, then it did exactly what it was meant to do. Horror isn't always about what we see. Sometimes it's about what we choose to ignore. If you want more stories like this, stories that explore fear, memory, and the darkness hiding beneath ordinary places, make sure to subscribe and share this episode. Leave a comment with your thoughts, theories, or the moment that disturbed you the most. Your engagement keeps these stories alive. And remember, some things don't disappear. They just wait to be remembered.